Started the record? Oh, okay.
Yep, I just started the recording. All right, welcome to this version of the memory team meeting. It is December 14th. There are a couple of not verbalized topics in there. So for today, since the milestone actually ends tomorrow, we have an early milestone in. I figured we'd run through the board real quick. 13.7. We'll start from the top. Camille, is this going to close by the end of the day tomorrow?
The docs table, not, because I didn't do anything about that. You saw, like, I focus on getting Periscope, like with the help of the Tyler from analysis group. We actually have it done and like waiting for match. So please move that. I'm actually gonna try to figure out to push that to the technical writer teams.
Yep.
Because like it's really more about that right now.
Okay. Let's see, Nicola, you're up next. What's left on this
that one is like merged. It's on production currently. It's also merged that it's enabled by default, but it's still not on production. But this is not relevant because the feature flag is already enabled. So I think that we can close it.
Yes, I also wrote a release post item for this, and I pinged you on it.
I didn't see. I'll check. Great.
Yeah, just like I wrote it like literally 3 minutes ago. So
awesome.
Please have a look.
I will.
All right. We have a topic for this one later, so I'll skip for now.
That one, like we didn't remove the actual feature flag, it just enabled by default. So I will leave it open and remove the feature flag in the next release. So I think that we can move it in the next one. Because in this release, it will be enabled by default, and in the next one, we can remove it. So
okay, let me just move it over then.
13.8. Yeah.
Yep, done.
Yeah, GC Compact will not land in 30.7 and even Puma 5.1 will not land 13.7 because we need a GPT run over it, and I will need some QA help to do that. And at that point, I don't think it's a good idea to merge it on the very last day on self-managed, even if it will like be fine. So yep. I hope for the first day of 13.8.
Okay, sounds good.
For that one, I'm preparing the POC, but I don't think that we will like end up with the mergeable MR for this.
By tomorrow.
It's just designed to give some like
That's very disappointing.
How to do it. Yeah.
Nicola, why you will not work over like the Christmas time to get it matched? I don't understand that.
You'll get the productivity token.
Should we drag this one over then too?
Yeah, we should.
Okay. Matthias, you're up.
Yeah, I'm working this right now, but it's a bit of an open-ended thing. It's just like we've created this issue without really knowing what exactly we're going to tweak here. But so I'm currently working on like making this, supporting some of these decisions, and then we'll probably focus on the simplest thing first that we can do. But A will definitely extend it to 13.8, so I would probably prefer to move it because, I don't think it will totally finish by the end of the week.
Okay.
This is
I'm gonna move that crack into backlog, this one. So I actually have the MR open, but I didn't finish that yet. But let's move that into backlog right now. It's not essential, it seems.
Okay.
Yes, and this will not land 13.7. I would even maybe move it to 13.9 because there will be a couple of Puma tasks stacked on one another. First one, MyQMR, then Nakayashi fork, and then only this. So we'll need some time between releases.
Disappointing.
It's it's not very convenient actually. I mean, this delivery updates.
But I mean, it makes sense to be a little conservative here, right? It's a big change, if we bump the main app server. So probably better to have some confidence that this in itself is an improvement or at least no regression, and then we can look at that separately. It makes sense to me to move it.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I make a quick comment here? Because I still need to record a kickoff video for memory, and I want to make sure that I say the right things. So for the Puma related work, that's all in its own sub-epic. So the work is in progress, but we can say that for the next milestone, we are continuing to work on that, right? And ship the new version of Puma and make the changes. So that's happening. And then there are a few other tasks, high impact tasks that we identified for the memory stuff that are in flight, like the garbage collection work that Matthias is doing, and the optimizations that are also going to continue. So the theme here is still very much, we've identified the most important things to reduce memory. We've started working on them. We continue to work on them in 13.8. Is that sort of a high level summary? You can go into more details.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds
Fine.
good.
I will point out.
I have a question about priorities. So, for example, while I'm partially blocked by Puma, I'm looking for other issue. So I wonder, should I look at what we picked as top things on RISE framework session, or should I pick something from the whole table? Like,
I think everything that we have in 13.8 is largely carryover from 13.7. So I would recommend the RISE table, to be honest.
okay.
I think we had an item for this anyway, like in case we talk about the GitLab exporter stuff. If we should change it to like shrinking it or like making some improvements that we know we can make, there will be a bunch of work that would fall out of this that would be immediately actionable as well. So maybe that's something we can look at as well.
We could discuss it.
So looking back over 13.8, we didn't have any items marked as deliverable. So anything that we may have marked as deliverable, and I don't think we went through that exercise, honestly, this milestone got carried over into 13.9.
So we're just shipping 13.7, correct?
I'm sorry, yep, 13.7. Let's take a look. All right, that's better. Non-zero is good. All right, so let's take a look at 13.8 then. So we don't have a ton there other than high level bullet points. I think we just kind of discussed those high level bullet points. So the carryover from 13.7, there's going to be some Puma work. It sounds like maybe there's some work from the GitLab exporter dropping or shrinking. Open the issue.
Yeah. So I had a question with this one because this is, by the way, I don't understand why we're not deleting items that are promoted and we always keep them as closed. It always creates confusion. I'll file that issue. But my question here is, ideally, like in the far future, we would remove GitLab exporter and migrate everything that is currently using it to a different solution, right? That is sort of how I look at it, because it's a thing that we don't really want to maintain anymore. That involves very likely other teams who have different competing priorities, right? So this is a longer term thing in my mind, right? And I can help maybe prioritize that and we can work on it. But I think my question is, are there things that we can do right now to already reduce the memory impact that is not dependent on other folks? That would be a question that I have, and I have a feeling from what I'm reading from you, Matthias, that's kind of the case, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so Camille had a really good suggestion, which was, and we didn't really measure this. We should probably still do that as well, but it's very likely true. The application server that GitLab Exporter runs on right now is a Puma, which is not a small piece of software. And this doesn't serve a ton of traffic, right? I mean, this is really just the stats endpoint. So the idea was maybe we can run this on a lighter weight application server for now, such as WebRig, or like, I don't know if that's a good idea to run WebRig. I don't think it's meant to be used as a production server, but something like this, something lightweight. It's a Sinatra rack app, so we can really run it on any rack server. It doesn't have to be Puma. So yeah, that would, I don't know, I think I posted something like, I would guess like it would cut the memory use at least in half. That was like a very rough finger in the air estimate. I have not measured this, but it would be more memory efficient for sure. Being slower though, right? So it comes with a performance trade-off. So this is something we also need to look at. For instance, I don't know about, I have no idea what the like traffic is for our .com GitLab exporter endpoints. It's very hard to say, even because we run such an ancient version of it in production that I don't even know what it is like nowadays. Hence the bias at first to get rid of this thing, because it's really like, it's basically in its current incarnation, it's not even used by us. Yes.
There is two aspects. One aspect, like you mentioned, being slower. I don't know about that. Second, we actually use WebRig on the web and side key exporter in the Puma processes anyway. So like we run the WebRig already in the production with the production traffic. If this is like the aspects that we are looking over.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Sure. Yeah.
That's great news, actually.
So yeah, but there's like a footnote to this, which is so you're mentioning this is only true for .com, right? It's not every customer, because we also have a normal Rails endpoint that serves metrics, I think.
Yes, but we really, I think, try to discourage everyone from using this endpoint because it has very bad performance characteristic on the Puma. This is why we use this dedicated endpoint. And I believe we use this dedicated endpoint also on the on-premise installations with the Prometheus integrated. And we use this dedicated endpoint on SideKey and on the Puma to scrape these processes, basically.
Got it. Yeah. So if the scraper, so if scrapes happen at the same frequency for GitLab exporter metrics as they happen now for the // metrics endpoint that is served by WebRig already, then it should be totally fine. Yeah.
I actually have one request, and it's actually something that may require editor planning ahead, but I would like to remove this /metrics endpoint with the 13.0.
Yeah, this is actually a whole separate aspect to this, because the other way that we can conserve a little bit of memory and also just make this thing a little bit easier to work with is to just start removing the things that we know we don't need, right? This is not true for all of these metric groups here. It's truer for some than for others, though. So we could, for instance,
we talk about two different things. Like here, like you talk about the GitLab exporter and the metrics that it exports. I mentioned about the /metrics endpoint.
No, I understand.
That you mentioned. It's like another aspect that we should remove that because it has very bad performance characteristic, basically.
Yeah.
And we should.
I understand.
Dedicated one.
What I was trying to say is, I spend an extraordinary amount of time even trying to understand how this works, because it's really, really fragmented the way it's implemented. We have all these different endpoints that some point to the same metrics. They're served by different systems. They have different performance characteristics. It's totally unclear. Some of the stuff is not documented at all. So it was super hard to work with this. So if there's any chance of kind of, like dropping some of that extra weight that we think we don't need, that surely doesn't hurt, right? It will make the application a little bit smaller. It will make it a little bit easier to understand. And it will certainly consume a little bit less memory, probably not much, but yeah, it will help anyway. So that's stuff that we can do now, like some of these things.
Yeah. So I have another question here from like a product perspective. Would this all essentially fall under monitoring and metrics? Like this entire thing here, right? It's like, this is exporting metrics, correct? So we have a group, you know, who, I know the product manager, Sarah, you know, who I think actually owns this problem space to some extent, right? As in, you know, the reconciling. And so my question is, can we get some support from them maybe? Like if I reach out and say like, hey, we've uncovered this thing, right? It consumes 350 megs of memory overall. It's extremely confusing. You know, can we maybe like think about what we can do here together? Because like that, I mean, I'm not sure if they're even aware of this, right? Or
I mean, that would be great. So I think it's an area that's kind of belongs to everyone a little bit, right? Because certainly infrastructure is super interested in any of this. And most of the drive in the direction of, removing this as well or shrinking it has been coming from infrastructure engineers as well. And a lot of these metrics are consumed by SREs and infrastructure, like all the process stuff. I think where the monitoring team came in was largely for how this is packaged up as a feature inside GitLab, right? And I don't know, I don't think GitLab Exporter purely exists for that reason. It's just that they happen to, that the internal and the embedded Prometheus that ships with Omnibus, it just happens to scrape this as well. So I think it would probably not be entirely correct to say that they own all of this, but they certainly have a stake in it as well, yeah.
No, like I'm not saying like throw it over the fence and walk away. I'm just saying maybe we can talk to them and understand what their viewpoint on this is, right? Because I'm anticipating this is kind of like I'm a little bit worried because this feels like you've uncovered this thing, and the deeper you dig, the more complicated it gets, right? And the more like cruft is there. And so I think maybe what we should decide on, like for us, is what can we actually do right now to make the situation better, right? As in short term, you know, I think we can maybe deprecate this officially, right? We can maybe change some things to already help. But I think then, unfortunately, there is maybe a wider question of how can we actually make sure that this thing disappears, right? Or that people move it over and prioritize it. And I'm not sure who, you know, that maybe we can work a little bit with others so that we can help them, but they can also.
No, totally. I mean, I mentioned this before as well, because I forgot where that discussion happened, but in some other issue, or maybe on the main epic, I pointed out that this to me is like 2 levels down from the main issue, which is that the whole self-monitoring feature runs by default. And so we happened to stumble upon GitLab Exporter, and that it had some history. Yeah, we talked about this already. But really, the way we stumbled on this was that GitLab self-monitoring as a feature is very heavy. Like it clocks in at a couple 100 megabyte if I run a single node omnibus even. So yeah, I guess there's 2 angles from which we can start this, either like top down from like, and there's a separate issue for this, if you remember, like where I suggested to maybe we can review whether this whole suite needs to be enabled by default. But that's more like the top-down view, because there's a bunch of other things that run adjacent to GitLab Exporter that also consume memory, just maybe not as much. Or this is more the bottom-up thing where we look at this one component out of the 8 or so that need to run to power GitLab self-monitoring. Yeah, and can just start with this one. I don't really have a preference, but like I totally agree that this is definitely also in the realm of GitLab self-monitoring.
It seems like there's a few issues missing from this epic, right? So the deprecation issue, or it looks like we need to create an issue for deprecating this, and then moving to a different server. If we want to get away from Puma, I didn't see any issue that called that specifically out. It may be buried in a comment somewhere, but sounds like
there's no issue yet. We can certainly create that. There's a discussion in this thread. I can follow up on this with the issue.
I will make notes in the agenda for those follow-up issues. And then do you have that link handy for the other one, the other self-managed services that we could cut back on?
I don't have it handy, but I'll find it. Just give me a second.
So of the issues in this epic, and as Alexi was looking for work to do, is there anything in here that we can do now that has no dependencies that would reduce the memory footprint?
None that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So this is then essentially blocked.
No, like the whole thing of migrating it to a new server that's just basically an implementation.
Oh, sorry, I forgot about the server migration.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yes.
And like I said, I still think that some of these issues are actionable, like just to shrink down GitLab exporter, which will save a little bit of memory and it will just make this whole thing a little bit clearer. Yeah. Like
that's what I was asking. So of these issues within this epic, is there anything we could bring into 13.8 for someone to pick up that's looking for work?
Yeah. Yes, so I'm pretty sure. So like whoever picks up these issues should probably, like some of them are like maybe 90 to 95% clear, but I'm fairly confident that remove process metrics from GitLab exporter, that's something we can do now. Move sidekick metrics is a bit more work, but it's actionable. I had a brief exchange with Sean in that issue, and we think out of the, I think, 2 metrics that did not exist already elsewhere, we can probably recreate them elsewhere.
So this one?
Yes. So there's a little, I think I created a table somewhere where I summarize what's actionable right now and how confident I am in doing that, by the way. It should be somewhere in there as well. Yeah, and what else is there? So the open questions one are the Git ones and the CI underscore metrics, because I don't know if or where they are used. Yeah, so that's probably it for now. But those 2, I think we could probably chip away at. Yeah.
Okay.
I found the issue link, by the way. Should I post it in the doc?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just throw it in here.
We have this scheduled for 13.8. So the outcome of this, what would the outcome of this issue be?
I mean, I think it's a product decision. So we need to find out, is that even acceptable to do, or under what circumstances could we disable this? Like the way I look at it is that, and I might be wrong, but I feel like if I run a very low volume, small single node GitLab deployment, I wonder, like, is it really necessary to have self-monitoring enabled by default for this node? Is that data really that interesting to look at as a user? And I don't know, maybe we have metrics behind how much that is used for certain sizes of deployments that we have. If we don't, then maybe we need to collect those first. But my feeling is that this is such a chunky feature. I think we should look into it, at least ask this question.
I think I'll reach out to Sarah because she should know, or maybe she has some data on, instance size and memory and these metrics being enabled or not. But I think this is a general question that we talked about it on a higher level. If we are running in a really memory constrained environment, are there specific features, with one of these is this here, that we are comfortable disabling in order to significantly reduce the memory footprint, right? That's, I think, a larger question. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would be interesting to have is kind of the real user metrics of, are people actually engaging with this feature, because we know it's enabled by default. So that's maybe not a super interesting data point. So
yeah, I have no idea what's available. I'll check the metrics. Maybe there is something. I kind of doubt it, right? Like I'm not sure how we would measure that in usage ping, but maybe I'm wrong, right? And there is some kind of measure as to, you know, people actually looking at metrics or something like that.
Right.
Where are we next? It looks like 13.8 is mostly review carryover from 13.7. Is anybody not sure what they're working on for 13.8? And remember, there's some holiday timeout in this one for folks, so less is probably more during the next milestone.
Yeah, and
Yes,
Lexi, if you
like...
do decide to pick up some of that work, let me know, and then we can kick it off together.
Yep.
I can at least point you in the right direction, I think.
Yeah, probably I will pick something for 13.8 from it, because Puma is going in its own way.
I had one additional thing that I'm not sure we need to formalize, but I would really like to have a baseline mini benchmark for our memory stuff. As in, you know, like whatever it is, in my mind, as simple as possible, right? A box where we know, like in 13.7, this is the memory consumption, and then in 13.8, when ideally we've finished a bunch of things, right, we can assess again and see if we actually made an impact. I'm not sure if that's captured anywhere.
It's quite tricky. I think we had an issue, but it's quite tricky. What do you want to measure, like on the load, maximum peak usage, or what? Like on which instance? Do you mean like small 2 gig instance, Fabian? Or do you mean production.com?
No, not production.com. Like, I mean, like, let's say we have a minimum, I think, requirement right now for 4 gigs, right? Where we expect stuff to behave, right? And I think maybe we have a get metric as to what, you know, what we expect in terms of performance for that to actually behave, right? And I would just say for that instance with 4 gigs of RAM, for example, right, under a load that we agree on, whatever that is reasonable for that amount, right? What is the amount of memory used? Just a baseline, right? I'm not saying I know exactly what that baseline should be, but we're looking here at, I think, primarily trying to get towards 2 gigs of RAM for smaller instances, right? So I think we need a, you know, currently this is what our minimum does, and this is the reduced amount of memory following on.
To be honest, what I could think of is to have like 4 gig machine and to run GPT over it and like chart the 95% of memory usage and chart amount of failed GPT specs.
Yes.
That's the simplest things I could imagine, like probably in some CI maybe.
I really agree with this because it's something I need right now. And today, again, I've already spent several hours trying to reproduce that baseline using our GCP project, which is great that we have it, but it's like slow to set up. And I wonder though, there's a lot of overlap with what QA engineering does, right?
Yes.
Because they run these pipelines already and they do collect memory metrics as well. I don't know if they collect it in a structured way in the sense that this goes into some kind of queryable data store, even if it's just a spreadsheet or something that we can actually reference. But
we could like query it. They have Prometheus on these instances, so we could query it for memory usage.
But they are ephemeral, so this stuff goes away when you shut down the test suite. Is the problem. So if we want to create like a baseline reference, we need to make this persistent somewhere. But I feel there's so much overlap. Am I correct that they've also completely reworked? Grant, you're on the call, right? Didn't you recently completely rework the way the GPT tool suite works? And to be frank, I have not caught up with it yet. I need to look at it still. But it certainly sounds like there is a lot of overlap because we would be doing the same things, right? We would just maybe focus more on different metrics. Sounds like it. And maybe
what's the question, sorry?
So we need some kind of setup where we can benchmark the alleged improvements that we make as part of memory optimization so that we actually know we made a positive impact. We need to do this on a recurring basis, right? So every time we make a change, we should verify that this actually does what it's supposed to do. So we need to have some kind of, like baseline reference benchmark that we can refer to whenever like any of us go in and make changes. Yeah, and in the past, we've usually done that by working with your team and basically like, involving QA on issues and asking to run the pipeline for us. But I'm wondering like, maybe at this point, we should align our workflows that we can also do that on our team and probably use the same tooling because it sounds like it would be largely the same thing. We might just be focusing on different data sets.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, as you probably well know. There's no silver bullet here. It's a very annoying thing because it feels like it's so reachable and so grabbable to be able to do this. But then when you get into the nitty gritty of it, it actually is quite complicated. So yeah, someone mentioned about running GPT against ephemeral instances. That's difficult because GPT needs an access token, and access tokens you can only create for the UI. So that's the first kind of major blocker there, which is very, very annoying. I've been watching an issue for months, over a year now, waiting for that to be fixed so you can actually create a token via an API or something. That would be that would make life a lot easier. Our functional tool GitLab QA gets around that because it has Selenium and browsering, so it can actually it goes in and creates the access token, hand cranks it for the UI, which isn't ideal, but that's what it does. So yeah, we're in. It's a really awkward space because it's kind of half functional, half performance. To actually do what you're asking to do with like constant checks, essentially every day or however frequent you want it, it's probably leans more into GitLab QA. I don't know if it's possible to measure the Docker memory usage in GitLab QA. If it isn't, I can't see how that wouldn't be doable. You're just running some commands, just say querying Docker for memory usage. That's still going to be quite difficult though, because obviously, how often do you query the usage? How often, how do you know? There could be a memory spike in the middle and you just don't know about it. So we can sit down and brainstorm this maybe in the new year and try and figure out the best way to kind of tackle this. We could go down the other route, which is what we do to quality environments, where you can get you guys in your own environment in GCP and run GPT against it. It's more of a static situation. But then we run an on the bus with that situation, and also you guys want to run with latest code. So as you see, it's not easy, but we should try and tackle it. We should try and solve it, but it'll take some time and some thought.
Yeah, so no, that sounds great. And yeah, I do think because like a native kind of or like an obvious extension point, and Alexei already mentioned this, could be Prometheus, right? Because if we were to just collect data, because we track things like RSS over the duration of the performance test suite, if we could just make them, just extract them, it could just be part of the performance tool run summary. If that was a CI job, right, we could extend that to just collect that data somewhere, and then we would have an automated way of kind of even recreating our baseline if it has changed, meaning that it might change again, right, over time. But then also, yeah, make that data available, and then in future runs that have changes applied, compared against that baseline, wherever that might live. But it could really just come out of Prometheus in the beginning, because that's easy to query.
Prometheus is there, and it does. You can, I believe, you can create like an API and ask it to return some stuff.
Yep.
But for example, in GPT for our environments, we multi-node, that complicates that straight away. You'd be asking for multiple boxes.
Yeah, and it's not persisted anywhere right now, right? Because the Prometheus will just, that data will only be available as long as the instance used for testing is available. So I think we should probably extract that, like query it from Prometheus and push it somewhere. That might just be a Google Sheet for now, something simple. Or maybe just a CI, honestly, just a CI artifact maybe for now. That would be even simpler. Well, whatever it might be. Another thing was that I wanted to talk to you about, but we can do that at the same time, is I wonder if there's a good workflow to apply like setting deltas as part of these performance pipelines, so that we can say run this pipeline, but with yeah, like tuning the GC a little bit differently, for instance. So stuff like that.
For the performance pipelines, generally I push against that kind of thing, because if you start bringing in A/B testing, then the performance pipelines take like an hour to run for one run. And the difference is that you've got GPT coming in and running itself, which is outside of the environment, and what you're asking is for our other kind of tool, GET, the GitLab environment toolkit, to come in and update environment to have a one specific set different, and that obviously can get quite out of hand if more and more teams came in and asked for all these different settings. So we always target the environments to be on the current latest thing, and then we say we can do one-offs. Obviously, that's fair enough, but on an automated way, then probably not. But this is where we're saying, like, maybe we'd go down the route of giving you guys your own environment. That could be a future thing to explore, although there's a cost with that, but for memory testing, that could be justified.
I think we have the issue in Epic. I think this is the right Epic to track that. Fabian, track your original request. And I created an issue this morning to make sure that we monitor the memory growth over the 2 gig baseline. So we get those signals once we actually hit our baseline, whatever it may be, when new features or code changes that baseline, that we get signaled. And again, we brainstorm how to do it. Sounds like you want a secondary one for the 4 gig baseline. Is that what you were saying, Fabian?
No, I think my request is essentially I would like to have the simplest solution to assess the status quo as it is, right? Like right now in terms of memory usage. And then when we make a change, right, to be able to make some kind of inference that has an impact or not, right? And I understand this is sort of, there's an arbitrary complexity in like how that could look, but I'm wondering, it's like, what is the minimal thing that we can actually do? And I also think that at the moment, yeah.
Maybe we could just hard code like Google Machine IP and just do it in a dirty way. I mean, almost the same we are doing manually during 2 gig week, but just via CI. Just have a prepared Google machine or 2 or 3 and just do like, I don't know, it will be like dirty and not pleasant and a lot of hard-coded values, but maybe it would be faster. I don't know. What do you think?
Fabian, I have one question to you, because like,
yes,
you want to have a metric that is post-merge, or do you want to focus on when we evaluate changes to be merged?
Sorry, I don't understand what post-match means.
On master.
So because from what I hear, like guys are talking about more about like how I can validate my changes before I merge them to provide like a meaningful number, where it seems like your perspective is like how I can see like holistically if the changes that we are merging are giving us benefit or not.
Yeah, I think I'm maybe just because I don't have the like deep knowledge, right? I'm more interested holistically, right? As it's saying, I think there are absolutely 2 things, right? It's like I would like to, I mean, the one thing is just tracking memory usage against a baseline, right? And there may be many things that are going on, but I do also think it is quite important if we do work, right? And we are trying to provide impact, to be able to say, I made this single change, right? And beforehand, the memory consumption under a specific load was let's say it was 4 gig, and now it's 3.8 gigs. We're happy, right? It's like I like to be able to measure, you know, the effect of what we're doing, right? And I think that is, if that is very complicated, then that's difficult to understand like if what we're doing actually has the impact that we thought it would. And I think that is a concern that I have, where I think if we have something that we can track and measure the memory consumption, we should be able to do that, right? Reliably, even if it's very simple, right? And we can get more complex over time, right? Against different deployment sizes and different scaling points, right? But at least, like, I'm a little bit worried we're going to do things, right? And we're not going to be really able to articulate in a couple of months what impact that has had on memory consumption. That's my worry.
Yes, but I think for the tool it shouldn't matter that much, Camille, right? To point to the master or to the custom branch, like or to the custom commit ID, and just pull this stuff.
I mean, like, to be honest, when I think about like measuring like RSS, like this is, for example, the metric that maybe it's the most of the concern for you, but it's also the metric that it's like the most stable metric of all of them. That is really hard thing like to move the needle on this metric. Now, like let's maybe look at the change of what Nicola was doing, the cached queries. Like I would argue that this change, even though it increases memory pressure, it has no noticeable impact on RSS because it kind of gets lost into all the memory allocations that we have and the way how the memory is actually persisted by system. So I'm actually like having trouble like saying that the single metric is the metric that's gonna holistically answer us that something is behaving better or worse, because I think it really depends on what you are fixing. For example, we were looking at the amount of the quest queries, and like we saw the dip on the amount of the SQL queries executed by the Postgres, but you cannot expect that there are gonna be less memory usage of that. But also because it's very small drop in all the memory usage, it's not gonna affect RSS at all, basically. So what I'm kind of saying, like that getting single metric is just not, it's not gonna give you like information about the trend. It's maybe give you information about the trend if you really make a lot of targeted changes that focus on RSS, which is like GC, MJ, malloc. But basically everything else, like it's very likely it's gonna affect RSS directly. You may see the impact on RSS in the long term, but not really like, let's say, validating your change. So I think like what I'm kind of saying, like we should, each time when we make a change, add that to a backlog of the metrics that we monitor over time, how they kind of change. For example, we have the cache queries. This maybe could be our metric that we start to track and see if it's kind of improving or worsening. Now, if we make a change to GC metrics, maybe we start tracking amount of the GC count being executed against application, and we kind of build a graph that shows like how this trend is changing over time. And this is the same, I guess, to RSS. So I'm kind of saying that this is, I mean, ideally we should have RSS being reduced, but practically this is like the hardest metric to really move a needle on. And what we can really kind of have see the impact is actually these more detailed metrics about the aspects that we are fixing, but kind of keeping on top of these metrics while we fix them, that they actually do not degenerate over time, or they do degenerate with the rate that we are kind of anticipating. I mean, another one would be like amount of the memory allocations and amount of the live slots, which is like what is Matthias looking right now. It's also pretty important to see the long term how it changes, if it grows, because this metric being pretty detailed gives you a pretty good hint about like the application size and how much pressure application generates on the memory allocations. And it can give you like some hint if how application memory grows over time, but it doesn't have, let's say, so much inertia as RSS does have, basically. It's actually much more dynamic and it's much more accurate on what you are measuring, basically. That's it. I don't have anything else, but I'm kind of saying that like we should start monitoring on many dimensions and like try to see the trend of these dimensions, how it changes over time. And this can give you like a hint if we are improving or regressing on the things that we are fixing. Because we're gonna be fixing different things, basically. And RSS per se has the highest inertia, and it's really hardest really to make any change on that.
It's also often directly related to a performance trade-off. So if you shrink your memory use, you might make the application perform worse. So yeah, you always need to look at that in context. So we need to kind of be aware. But like, to be fair, I don't think Fabian meant to suggest that we should only track RSS. I think correct me, Fabian, but I think what you were suggesting was we just need a way to validate that the changes we make are going in the right direction, whatever that way may be, right? Have a way of getting success.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm also advocating for, I think everything that Camille said is probably more right than I could even sort of recapitulate, right? But I think it's also like what I think I'm asking for also for sort of digestibility, right? Is to say, okay, can we establish, that we are making an impact on our suite of things that we ideally would monitor, but also, if, for example, if we now have to go away and build this monitoring capability for the next 3 months, right? That's going to be difficult. So I'm also saying, okay, what can we do like with sort of minimal effort right now that puts us into the right direction, knowing that there's probably many things that we will want to add to it. But I think I'm mainly advocating for starting along that journey rather than delaying it, because we're already doing things where ideally we would see an impact. And so people will ask us eventually, okay, so what does that mean, right? And then I would like to be able to say, well, given, this metric, right, we've improved by X, and that is what that actually means, right? Even though it's imperfect. So it's more sort of an advocating for making sure we can evaluate ourselves against something, right? Because otherwise I'm worried that we're just going to do things, but we're not really sure what it means.
Could this be captured in GPT pipeline results somehow, like amount of failed requests that were like too slow because we had like too much memory pressure and needed to swap?
But I think that's the point that Camilla was trying to make as well, right? That we have this pre-merge scenario where we're working on some change, and then you think it's going to make a difference, and you send an MR, and you want to kind of prove it's going to make things better, and then maybe you run the performance tool suite to measure that. But that is not .com, right? So those are our omnibus reference architectures that we're testing. So I think we need both, right? We also want to build up this metrics catalog that Camilla was suggesting, where we actually track this for .com over time, maybe via dashboards, or maybe we even have alerts for this stuff. Who knows? So we probably need a combination of the two. Like, I don't think you can like squash all of these things with just GPT.
I'm kind of thinking that really like we need to figure out a targeted way to test our changes when we develop them, to have like some understanding what impact we kind of anticipating, and then kind of doing the same anticipation, like validate that if it's actually translatable to high throughput system, which is could be like dev.gitlab.org, staging, gitlab.com, or whatever else environment is that, and like with the GPT being one of these, but also like having this statistical difference that it's not like very statistically accurate to how like actually the system run in the production due to the data set and like amount of the request distribution. So but I'm kind of thinking that like whatever we do, like we should understand where this change will be impacted. Like with the Nicola, we know that we look at the amount of the cached queries. So we did know where to look at, and like this is something that we could validate ahead of the time, and it was then quite easy to validate on the gitlab.com if it actually makes an impact. So I'm kind of anticipating that the clue here is like if we identify the metric that we are interested in, we should have a quick way to run all our testing against all of these environments in like the quickest possible time, and add this like metric graph to our like dashboards. Like Prometheus being here like very good tool that it actually gives us this history of the data that we can graph over many months, basically. And we could kind of also look at this, how it changed since like 1 month ago in more like, let's say, statistical form. I kind of like GitLab.com because of this, its request distribution, but it's also really hard to make a difference on GitLab.com. But it's possible.
Yeah, and I think also, at least from my understanding, one of the goals here is sort of the target is the opposite, right? It's like a small instance under memory constrained environments, right? And I think there we also want to know, if we run Puma in single mode, what does that change, right? That's never something we're going to try out on .com. Well, maybe with Kubernetes, I don't know, but I think that would be a thing where you could say, like, where I would be naively interested in saying, like, okay, we are doing this. What does it mean, right? And I think that would be important to answer.
So yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about different approaches there, and I think the team has been completely correct. There's two different things here. There's the MR, in my head I call it the MR kind of check, which is the check of the actual in development code, and that would be a GitLab QA kind of piece or a different pipeline where the actual code is compiled and actually built into an actual instance to test against. And then there's the other aspect of GPT, which is the kind of the integration outsider test, which is done right towards the end of the process, which is already an omnibus. We're running a test, and at the moment what we do is that we keep an eye on memory, but to be honest, it doesn't really get checked that much because as Camille said, we very rarely see memory change. Memory has been pretty consistent since we started running these tests. We're much more intrigued in CPU and other things, but we can try and maybe look at that more, but it is on a kind of ad hoc basis, and maybe we can make it more automated. But I think the team are probably much more interested in that MR state of memory changes. And one test that could work well with that is to do like a GitLab QA test against a build Docker image that is strictly locked to 2 gig of memory. And if I remember how Docker works correctly, Docker should not take well to that memory being over or attempted to be overrun, and the instance should start failing quite quickly. So there could be some kind of test you could do there to try and keep that monitoring up. But it really is a complicated thing. So it's just trying to figure out what is the right balance of trade-offs and approaches. I think it'll fail. I need to double check how Docker handles memory going over. Either it'll fail or this will just become incredibly bad because it'll try and just swap and it'll just become unstable. And at least then it would fail, and you'd have something that says, hey, something's gone wrong here, and needs to be investigated from memory. But then I guess the expectation is that we run on everybody's commits and MRs, so it could cause confusion because memory's not easy, as you know. It could just be the case one day that memory just took a bit more for some reason. You don't know why, then it doesn't happen again. I think that's the hardest bit, is sometimes memory will just wax and wane, whereas other times people will commit something and there's a definitive like 100 meg increase, and obviously that's maybe a bit easier to track down. I'm more worried about the memory's not. It's not because if you run GitLab QA right now 10 times in a row, I'm pretty sure the memory would be exactly the same. So yeah, depends what the OS is doing as well.
Yeah, maybe these are all very good points. I mean, maybe we can just start collecting all these ideas and thoughts in the issue and
yes,
do it asynchronously.
I don't think we can solve it right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack there.
Sure. It is a lot to unpack.
Yes, for example, I have a targeted question to you for you to consider. Like, when you're gonna be looking at the init slots, figure out how you could gather this metric over time, or like how you would measure that, how you could graph that to see if it's regressing or not, and like how it's changing over time. Because this is like one of the examples that like you're not gonna notice that on the RSS, but you may notice that on the very detailed metric from the garbage collection. And this is exactly what I think Fabian is then looking at. He wants to see a trend. It doesn't matter on what, but on something that is of the aspect that we kind of are working on, like how it affects what we are working on the metrics from the application. And like GC available slot seems like one of these examples. So the question is like how we could like use that, how we could graph that and like add that to our toolkit of the metrics that we are looking at, how we could look at that from the QA perspective as well, how we could gather this data if it's possible. And
I think this is a great point. Should we create an issue for this actually to think about what are the metrics we want to track over time? And then I think like most of these might already be in Prometheus, to be honest. I think we track GC stats as part of the Ruby sampler. I might be wrong, but it would be easy to add. And then we
yes,
can
I actually have the idea for a very simple metric that should translate very well for everything, like an average amount of the memory allocation pages per a single request, basically. Like this is something that you should see on the QA, should see on the GitLab.com. It should kind of like correlate with the amount of the data set, but should give you some initial idea, like if we are consuming more memory over time on the pages, or are we kind of going down on average on per request. And maybe this is like 95 percentile also, or maybe different. But this would be like my idea for like the single metric.
I need to drop, unfortunately. Thanks for the discussion. Also, I'm not implying that this is like I'm quite excited about metrics, right? I like measuring things and understanding them. I'm essentially just raising that this is important, to do. And I think these are great ideas. So I'm looking forward to, the issues and the direction we're going. So thanks everybody for pointing out your different views. I need to drop.
Thanks, Fabian.
Bye.
Bye.